right, hey everyone. Welcome to Data Brunch with ICPSR. If you love data, this is going to be food for thought. I'm Dory.
And I'm Anna.
We are recording these episodes, well, I'm going to say live from the 2021 ICPSR biennial meeting. And so please excuse cameos from canine colleagues, kids in class, and other unexpected moments. And if Facebook has come back online, no, I'm not going to go there. We might go there later. But if you are posting about us, please use the hashtag Data Brunch and also the hashtag ICPSR.
So today, like Dory mentioned, we are excited because we're coming to you live from the ICPSR biennial meeting. This has been 3 days of incredible data-related training and resources. You are also hearing all of the bloopers that Dory and I usually have live. So you'll know how much our producer extraordinaire, Scott Campbell, means to us. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. In just a moment, we'll get to talk to Dr. Libby Hemphill, who studies social media, civic engagement, automated moderation techniques, and the connections between them. We are incredibly lucky because we get to call Libby a colleague. Can't think of a better way to close out the biennial meeting.
We do have a few things we want to let you know about first. So first, if you haven't seen this yet, we are hiring. As of this recording, we have 5 job openings, including a data project manager and many more. We will link to those in the show notes. And we do have quite a few webinars coming up, and I'm going to link to those in the show notes and also here live for folks attending. Those webinars include topics like healthcare, health reform, bone fragility related to disabilities. There's a webinar coming up on student voting behaviors, on restricted data, on GIS data. We have a lot of training and it's free. And for everyone joining us here live, again, just head over to icpsr.umich.edu. You can click on the events listing that's over there on the left to register.
Thanks, Anna. As you know by now, we have a constant stream of new resources, and they're not all related to extremism and social media. For example, our newest current events in the Bib, aka the bibliography, shows how exposing students to a political science class in community college helps create an informed electorate. Frank Fernandez recently published an article in Educational Research called "Turnout for What? Do Colleges Prepare Informed Voters?" which uses the Community College Civic Outcomes Survey found at ICPSR.
And now I have that song stuck in my head. I don't know if we're allowed to use that song for copyright reasons, but you know I'm all singing it. And if you are interested in digging into data related to extremism and social media, and that's what brought you here, we have a new study for you. This study is called "The Role of Social Networks in the Evolution of Al-Qaeda-Inspired Violent Extremism in the United States." It's from 1990 to 2014. And the purpose of this research is to address the question, how do foreign terrorist organizations mobilize Americans to carry out attacks on their behalf? There's very interesting data available there. So we will link to that right now in the chat and also in the show notes.
Thank you, Anna. And without further ado, we would like to introduce you to our guest for today, Libby Hemphill.
Hi, thanks for the virtual claps. Those feel pretty awesome. Thanks for having me.
So Libby directs the resource synergy, this will be a blooper where I stop and say what I'm saying again in our normal workflow. So Libby directs the Resource Center for Minority Data at ICPSR and holds a joint appointment as an associate professor in the University of Michigan School of Information. She studies politicians, nonprofit organizations, and television fans to understand how people use social media to organize, discuss, and enact social change. She also develops automated mechanisms for moderating and classifying content in social media in order to reduce toxicity in online conversations.
And just as a reminder, this is a live taping of this podcast. So our attendees who are here with us, you are welcome to type in questions at any time. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of your window. We will get to as many of those questions as we can.
So Libby, first, congratulations on being a co-recipient of the University of Michigan School of Information Award for Outstanding Conduct in Instruction, Leadership, and Community Engaged Research.
Woohoo! Well deserved.
Thank you.
So in the School of Information's news release about the award, you were praised for acquiring data sets and developing materials, tools, and research data about historically marginalized populations are appropriately accessible and reusable. So that'll be a great lead in to the first question that we usually ask our data brunch guests, and it's that we love to see the stories behind the data. So what makes your research a great story?
Oh, wow. Well, I think there are a couple of different stories that we can tell from my research. The award from UMSI is actually, the way I read it is that it's an award for doing the work that I get to do at ICPSR, where it's sort of for everything we do at RCMD, which is the Resource Center for Minority Data, where we've had some big successes in the last couple of years on expanding our collections to include gender identity minorities and sexual orientation minorities, and then to shore up other collections with racial, ethnic, and religious minorities as well. So that's sort of like my administrative role. In my research role, the one that I think we're going to focus on today is that I study white supremacy online and ways that we can use human AI moderation techniques, where AI means artificial intelligence, which is a pretty broad term for anything computers can do to help out. That's how I'll use it today. So how we can use human AI collaborations to try to address some of the problems of white supremacy online, especially white supremacist speech specifically.
Thank you. So can you talk about your research into using machine learning technology to moderate hate speech and how that can help social media companies adapt to the spread of hate speech on their platforms?
Sure. So part of what I do, so I consider myself a computational social scientist. So that means I'm a social scientist who uses computational methods. And in this case, when I'm studying extremism online, and I'm going to say extremism and not hate speech, in part because I think that hate speech is a sort of a triggering word for lots of different sides, where it's contentious, I think would be even a more accurate description. That what counts as hateful is not universal. And then we end up, if we're talking about hate speech, we often end up in a fight about what counts rather than what can we do about it. Where when we use a moniker like extremism, that sort of gets us into more behaviors than just speech and gets us away from some of these definitional distractions that get us to only look at what is overtly hateful. So what do I do? So what I want to try to understand is whether or not we can suggest ways that platforms could do a better job following and enforcing their own rules about extremism and hateful speech on their platforms. And in order for us to be able to, so I'm assuming that platforms have policies against hateful and extreme speech, which the mainstream platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Pinterest, they do. So we're going to set aside, should they? So they do, they have them. How do we make sure that they are enforced and that those standards are upheld? One of the first things we have to be able to do is to identify the speech that's not allowed, or the activity or behavior that's not allowed anyway. So we have a detection problem. And then we have a mitigation problem. So assuming that we can find it, we need to know, what should we do? And I do research at each of those stages. So at the detection stage, how do we know what's problematic? And at mitigation, so assuming that we can identify something that's problematic, what can we do about it? And at the detection stage, I'm interested in ways that we can use the expertise of marginalized populations to identify problematic behaviors online. So traditionally, machine learning uses a crowd, and I'm using air quotes. The people who are watching can see me, but you can't hear my air quotes in the podcast. A crowd is, I'm learning through some experiments on Mechanical Turk, a crowd is overwhelmingly white and male, and you will not be surprised to find that what white men think is hateful is not the same as what those more sort of personally impacted by hateful speech find as hateful. So when we use that narrow definition of what's bad to train computational models, we miss a lot of things that are really hurtful. Everything from microaggressions to overt misogyny or racism get missed if we only have one set of labelers. So in the detection, we work on both expanding the role of annotation, so human annotation, in telling us what is problematic, so that we have better data to feed into machine algorithms to teach them to recognize lots of different kinds of potentially problematic behaviors. But in order to sort of overcome what might be a greedy or overreactive or overly sensitive system, we bring the humans back in and we say, hey, the machines think this might be a problem. Can you take a look at the context and see if it is? And some examples of where context might matter, there's often language that groups use to talk within the group. I'm a queer person, I say queer to other queers. That might be okay, but it's not okay for straight people to use potentially derogatory labels for queer people when they talk about me, even if it's okay for me to use them about myself. And so we can't look at just the speech, we have to be able to look at the context of the speech, and the context is what humans are good at, and the speech itself are what machines are good at. And so when they work together, we can do a better job of understanding, is this particular exchange or behavior in keeping with the values of this place, or is it not? And that's what we can do for detection. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'll pause there because I see there's been some chat that maybe I can check in on questions about, but I can also talk about the mitigation piece.
Yeah, no, this is, it's fascinating. And I want you to just keep rolling because it's all, what I feel like is happening is I keep getting questions and then I get more questions. So one thing that you've kind of brought up for me is, so all of this conversation you're talking about is happening on these social media platforms, which are private by nature. Do those social media platforms, do the private social media platforms have a responsibility to the public?
Yes, they do. So they're private company. They're actually public companies that are privately owned. So there are varying levels of private behavior that can occur on these platforms. But I have no problem saying that privately owned companies have public responsibilities, and publicly owned companies have even more. And so some of those are about the sort of, what do private businesses owe citizens under a system of capitalism, but some of them are also sort of ethical concerns about when you occupy a space like Facebook or Twitter does in the world of public discourse, what moral requirements do you have? And I think that they do have moral requirements to the public and that they haven't been keeping them.
Thank you. Thank you so
Sure.
much. I'm still wrapping my mind around what you said earlier when you said that what a white supremacist thinks is harmful is not necessarily what someone who's affected by their work is harmful. And that I mean, mind blowing. I'm sorry. I think I'm going to be chewing on that all day.
I mean,
yes.
I think that this relates some to there's a question in the Q&A about extreme and whether or not there's a shared definition of extreme. So there's a statistical definition of extreme. So we can use the statistical definition to tell us how far out of the norm is a particular behavior. And if it's really far out of the norm, then it's extreme. So that's one way to do it. Whether that counts as quote political extreme or quote cultural or social extremism is different. But statistically, there is an extreme. To Dory's question about the people who are doing harm to, or speaking and doing harm, and those who might experience it differently, I think I want to look up what the name of the book is. So I'm gonna tell a story in just a second about how I learned to pay attention to this, and it was in my own like personal anti-racism growth that I was like, oh, this is a thing that I did not recognize. So let me look up what the name of the book is. But yeah, the idea that the people who are harmed, that you may not even, so white supremacists often are not worried about whether or not they're hurting someone else's feelings, but all of us are so deeply soaked in, well, all of us in the US are so deeply soaked in this white supremacist culture that we might be doing harm and not even notice. So we may not recognize the sort of racist undertones or histories of common sayings or things that seem innocuous but are not really. So I'll give two examples of anti-Semitism specifically, in part because I think like among white supremacists care a lot about race, but they have racialized Jews and Muslims also that are not races necessarily, but they are sort of cultural and religious monikers as well. And so from anti-Semitism, so when President Trump came to Michigan to speak at the Ford plant, I don't even remember how many years ago this was, but he referred to the workers at Ford as, or was he talking about the workers at Ford? In his remarks at Ford, he used the phrase good bloodlines to talk about Southeast Michigan and Ford workers, et cetera. And without any context, you're like, okay, bloodlines, like he must mean we have, like, we're good workers and always have been. In the context of Ford, where we sort of, if you're paying attention to anti-Semitism in the history in the US, you know that Henry Ford was a devout anti-Semitic speaker and writer. So you have this sort of Ford and his legacy of anti-Semitism. And then you have the essentialism of white supremacy that is about our genetic bloodlines and what they mean. And then you have a US president speaking in this sort of historically anti-Semitic place, saying this historically anti-Semitic phrase, and then being able to say, well, that's not what I meant. But that's not what Jews heard. So, you know, the context of where the speech is occurring and who says it and what historical references are embedded in it matter. And you can't just show up at Henry Ford's place talking about good bloodlines and not expect somebody to push back and say, that's pretty anti-Semitic. And so that's one of the examples of, we say, well, but it was innocuous. Be like, on one level it might be, but also it brings with it a set of sort of hateful baggage that we have to acknowledge if we're trying to be inclusive and respectful.
We have some questions rolling in. Let's see, I'll take one from our participants. Here's one that asks, are machines able to detect sarcasm? And do your human crowds ever find that sarcasm can be offensive?
So yes, machines can detect sarcasm, but not very well. And do humans find them offensive? Absolutely. And so this question looks like it's, maybe I'm not supposed to say names out loud on the podcast, but from a participant, you know who I'm talking to because you're listening. But so yeah, machines are getting a little bit better at sarcasm, but this is actually one of the challenges for platforms is that in all of their terms of service, they carve out an exception for humor, satire, parody, etc. And the people when people make mistakes about stuff that they posted, whether they knew it or not, they're often like, oh, I was just trying to be funny. And sometimes funny hurts anyway. And then we need to look at whether the benefit of the funny outweighs the pain of the hurt or the cost of the hurt. And often the way that I would look at this is that sarcasm that punches up is probably fine, and sarcasm that punches down is just unnecessary. And if you're familiar with the punching up and punching down, it's about looking at who has power in a particular situation. And when you're criticizing somebody who is more powerful, that is a sort of a speech act that I'm willing to protect, where someone who is in power punching down or hurting people who have less power is a speech act that, while I recognize it as important under First Amendment law in the US, I don't find it as important to protect in other private spaces. So I don't want the government making a rule about that, but I'm totally fine with my immediate community saying we don't punch down here.
I'm wondering, can we go back just a little bit? And this is me showing my own lack of knowledge. Can we talk a little bit about, so I know that social media data is kind of notoriously hard to crunch, hard to get access to. Can you talk a little bit about what data are you actually looking at, and how does that, can you just talk about the sort of the data package itself? That's not the right word, but can you help me phrase this better?
Sure, we could talk a little bit about like what is in social media data and why is it hard to work with. So when I'm talking about social media data, I'm thinking of the content that users have posted to social platforms, where platforms are places that exist to host user-generated content. So I guess now that used to be a much narrower space. Now it's so big. It's everything from Facebook to Reddit to Parler to Substack. But I'm focused on places like Facebook or Twitter, where there are potential for following relationships and for commenting on each other's content relationships. For a report that I did with the Anti-Defamation League Center on Technology and Society, I pulled all of the comments that have been posted to Stormfront, which is the most successful white nationalist discussion board on the internet. Their term for themselves is white nationalist. I'm not assigning a term to them. And then from Twitter users who in their bio or in their tweets themselves claim an affiliation with the quote alt-right, and then all of Reddit. So I use Reddit as sort of the internet baseline. And then Twitter alt-righters as a sort of extreme in a public space, and then Stormfront as extreme in a niche space, because Stormfront is public, but you and I are probably not gonna comment there. Just, I'm assuming that you're probably not gonna comment there. And so what that data looks like. So there are a couple of different ways to look at the data. So technically, if you're reading your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed or your Reddit homepage or looking at the Stormfront boards, you're looking at data. You're just looking at it in the presentation layer that they have defined. Usually when I'm looking at data, it comes in JSON, which is the JavaScript object notation, where it's a structured format that is represented in plain text, but has key value pairs that can be nested. And I'm pulling them from the APIs that platforms provide, where API is essentially the way that computers talk to each other. So there's a set of queries that I can make and I get a set of results back, and those results are in JSON. And then we put the JSON through some Python or R scripts to try to pull out what we're interested in. For me, it's usually the text and the date, because I'm looking at language over time. I'm not particularly interested in individual users, but rather the overall language that gets used and over time. And then we represent it in a table, just like a survey, just totally different data, but same format. Does that help, Anna?
Yeah, that does. And for anybody who's following along, is there a website you can shout out real quick that somebody might go to see some of the stuff that you're talking about as they're listening?
Maybe.
Just to really throw you on the spot.
You mean to look at raw data or to look at?
Maybe like a report or something like that.
Maybe. Social media researchers don't often talk about their data, in part because we might get in trouble. So I don't have one off the top of my head, but I'll get you one to put in your show notes.
Okay, cool. That's perfect. And maybe this is a good spot to mention that, going to someplace like, ICPSR to get the raw data. Obviously, you all who are here know about that. But something like the Resource Center for Minority Data which is part of ICPSR, is a really valuable place to be able to find data that would be useful here. And then hopefully for other folks like me who are not as good at the raw data, but could definitely use some of that that data that has been packaged and reported out, we'll get that to you in the show notes.
Okay. I did put one example of a study at ICPSR, the Me Too data set from some researchers at Northeastern University. They were studying Me Too, the hashtag, on Twitter for about a week in 2017. But if you use that data, you'll see a bunch of the challenges that we have in archiving and sharing social media data, that Twitter's terms of service, which are the rules that Twitter sets for using its platform, prohibit us from sharing tweets with one another. And so what the team at Northeastern did was share the tweet IDs, so you can look up each individual tweet at Twitter or through the Twitter API, but we're not actually allowed under Twitter's rules to share the data. So we can share metadata, but not data itself.
Let's see if you answered this question with what you just said about Twitter. Has the change in Twitter policy on research data that kind of snuck in mid 2020, has it, is it now possible to do more with archiving Twitter data in research sets? Has it given more access?
I love that you think it snuck in among academics who study Twitter. It was like, oh my God, now we have access. But it didn't actually change the rules. So the only thing that changed is that we can get more data than we used to be able to while still following Twitter's rules. The prohibition on sharing still exists. But I mean, you can listen to other talks that I've given about this to get a sense of how I feel about terms of service, and whether or not I have any moral or legal requirement to follow them. So there's a little, just Google that. The answer is shorter than you think.
We will link those too. We'll try to get all this good stuff in the show notes.
Yeah. There are things I probably shouldn't say in the ICPSR podcast, but I've been public about it somewhere else.
All right, let Scott know.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Let's take another one from our participants. Trying to see. Why is it so impossible for people to apologize for the harm, even if it came unintentionally or out of ignorance?
I love this question, in part because I mentioned I would talk about mitigation. So I'm going to tell a long story about a mitigation study to answer your question about apologies and harm. So we did an experiment on Reddit where we used a human AI combination such that every time somebody personally insulted someone else on Reddit, so a very narrow subset of unacceptable behaviors, where when somebody personally insulted somebody on Reddit, either a human or a bot would respond with one of, I think we have 6 different strategies for de-escalating that conversation, where we use things like a humorous meme or a confronting, hey man, that's not how we act here. Or we say, oh, I'm sorry, this looks like there's some confusion. Of all of the things that we tried, only apologizing mattered. All the other ways that we tried to de-escalate, they didn't make anything worse, but they didn't make anything better, except for apologies. And so an apology, in order to be effective, doesn't even have to come from the person who did the harm. That it can be effective at reducing the rate of personal insults, even if a third party says, hey, I'm sorry that that happened to you. I'm sorry that this occurred in our space. And so apologies are really useful because they do acknowledge that someone hurt. And it doesn't actually matter whether we meant to hurt someone or if we didn't, that they still feel hurt. And so it's important for us to apologize. The question that was asked is, why is that so hard? Well, in order to acknowledge that someone else is hurt, almost always, like if somebody stubs their toe, this isn't true, but usually it means that someone else messed up. And it's hard to say, I messed up or my friend messed up. I'm also a parent of a young child, and a lot of what I study in moderation and content moderation is just like parenting, that you have to be able to say, I messed up, and to acknowledge that everybody's working on something and everybody messes up sometimes, and that it still matters that we say, I'm sorry that I hurt you. I will try not to do that again in the future. And that there are actually these two parts to apologies. So the recognizing that harm occurred and taking ownership of that harm, but then also an effort to repair. And this comes from sort of restorative justice framework is like the legal framework around it. But I think it's also just from like toddler training that apologies require repair, not just acknowledgement. And both of those things are really hard to do because they threaten our social standing to say, I messed up. And I think that we put a lot of pressure on each other that raises the stakes of an apology. And that if we just get a little bit gentler to each other and acknowledge that everybody messes up sometimes, which is also hard to say, but there's even some research about how we are all the trolls on the internet. Like if you catch us in a bad mood on the right topic, we will all be jerks. And so we have to acknowledge that sometimes people are jerks on purpose more often, but everybody messes up, and that we socially have to be willing to both accept and enact apologies for that to get easier. But to recognize that it's hard to say I screwed up is an important first step.
I want to say, like, I am here for the podcast on Libby's life advice. I would also go to that. So a couple things. One, we did get a question from someone about the media bias chart that comes from Ad Fontes Media. I want to just give a quick shout out to that because we actually had our last podcast episode was with the creator of Ad Fontes Media, and we got to talk about it was fascinating. I wish you could have been there for the whole conversation. It was wild and so just knowledge bombs dropping, so good. But it's an interesting connection to the conversation that we're having right now about how you're saying, helping, you can do so much by even saying the apology, even if you didn't do the thing. And Vanessa Otero was talking a lot about how if you, the way that we move people from, non-evidence-based media towards evidence-based media and how that happens over time. And I wish we could do kind of a mashup of these two episodes because there are so many good nuggets here between those two for how we could kind of move the needle on making that better for our world, talking about how, data doing good. So next question that's coming up, and I'm realizing that we're getting short on time. I wish this was a 4-hour podcast, but sadly it is not. So a question that we have is, do you feel like your work relies too much on the assumption of good faith from social media companies? And I will address that was a larger question that I have combined into a smaller question. But again, do you feel like your work relies too much on the assumption of good faith from social media companies?
I have not experienced good faith from social media companies, and I still get work done. So I don't think I'm relying on their good faith. In fact, I'm assuming that they will not act in what are the best interests of society. And instead, what we need to do, so when you look at how do I try to have public impact in the work that I'm doing, I do engage platforms. I'm happy to talk to them if they're willing to meet. But I talk to the press. I do podcasts like this. I work with advocacy organizations like the Center for Technology and Society because I don't trust platforms to do good things with the research that we do or that they do. As Dory mentioned earlier this week, we saw Facebook knows a lot about what its impacts are, and it doesn't act in society's best interest for them, or even perhaps in the individual interest. So a lot of my time is spent getting around what platforms want and what platforms want to be able to do. And I think I don't expect them to behave well, in part because they're profit-driven companies. Like, we've told them that profit and growth matter, so they're going to optimize for profit and growth. And until we change the stakes, like, why would they change their behaviors? And so part of what we can do to change the stakes, if those are the levers I have to pull, the profit levers, then we can do things like educate the public to be less extractable on their platforms. Or we can raise a stink in the press. Like, these are things that still work. Like, if you want change in the world, you need to bring hearts and minds and the media. And so that's what you got to do. And then platforms will come along when they have no other choice, just like any other company, that they'll come along when they don't have another choice.
A lot to think about. All right. I'm looking to see if any other questions come in through the Q&A. But I'll ask you while we're waiting, can you talk about one of the biggest challenges that you faced in your work?
Getting data in the first place is definitely the biggest challenge. So some of it is because there are technical limitations. Like, one of our questions was about the change in the academic researcher API that Twitter made last year. There didn't used to be a separate way for academics to get data from Twitter. We were bound by the same rules as individuals and companies. I mean, many of the ORs who are watching today are parts of academic organizations, and you know that we don't have millions of dollars around to just buy up some data for one study. So to put us in the same pot as like a brand, like, I don't know, Audi USA, they have a lot more money to spend on figuring out what social media has to say about them than an anti-racism researcher has to study anti-Blackness online. Like, it wouldn't make sense to put us in the same pot. Of course, we weren't going to have data. So some of them are like the rules, policy limitations. Some are technical. That the amount of data that we're talking about, I just pulled up. I have 95 gigabytes of data that are compressed, that are the tweets from US and Indian politicians over the last 3 years, maybe. So super compressed data, 95 gigabytes, that's more than ICPSR's whole collection used to be. So thinking about how much data that is and how you move it around, and that's just one project. Like, I had a conversation with a potential depositor a couple of weeks ago who had 20 petabytes of data. Like, the physical storage requirements for 20 petabytes is more than our server room. Like, you can't hold this much data. And the cheapest, I'm pulling up a chart in my notes because I just had this conversation. So moving a petabyte of data from place to place in the cloud, the cheapest one I can find. Does anybody whose audio is on want to guess how much it costs to move a petabyte from place to place? So like, if I wanted to move a petabyte from ICPSR to a user, what that might cost?
$600.
Anybody else?
Someone says 10K in the chat.
Somebody says 10K, somebody says 600 bucks. The cheapest I can find is $52,500.
OMG.
So a petabyte, and this is going from Amazon Web Services Glacier Archive, which is like a petabyte object. Moving it from place to place, Amazon will charge you $52,000 to do that. Which is, yeah, right? It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. For anybody who's listening, you are hearing the speechlessness and you're not getting to see the wide open gaping mouth visuals that are just, it's wild to us. And we work with data. So this is an incredible amount of money that we're talking about for, just for the ability to get access to the, to one, kind of one piece of the puzzle.
Yep. And so if you're wondering, ORs, where is the social media archive or SOMAR? There it is. We're still trying. But and the storage for a terabyte a month is about $1. So I'm paying $95 a month of my own money to store some data before we deposit. But when you're thinking about, we need to have 2 or 3 copies of data, you're up to $3 per terabyte. This scale is just outrageous, and it requires a completely different funding and storage and infrastructure than the data that we as social scientists are used to and that ICPSR is really good at, and we're learning how to do that. And I'm impressed with how much we've learned as an organization, and what we're able to change. But yeah, massive scale data is coming for social science, and it's going to be expensive.
So for everybody listening, ICPSR is working on this. We are working on, you heard the reference to SOMAR. This is going to be our social media archive. It's coming, but it's tough. So we're working on it. And hopefully by the time, posterity listens to this, there will be an answer to that question. Thinking about time, I do have one last question that I wanted to ask. And really this is, what is it that you wish people would ask you?
I get this every time somebody does a live interview with me, and I feel like I always fumble it. What do I wish that people would ask? I think I would ask can individuals ever do anything, or are these problems too big? And I think the answer is that there is no problem that is too big for us to solve together. And that, like we talked about apologies earlier, that's something that we can do. We can say, I'm sorry someone else hurt you. We can say, I'm sorry this space isn't what you needed to be yet. We can be more thoughtful in the way that we engage. But even those individual behaviors, if they're still just from individual to individual, aren't going to matter. We're going to have to do things together. We're going to have to put pressure on platforms together. We're going to have to put pressure on bad actors together. We're going to have to hold each other accountable, even when we're in bad moods, and even when somebody says something that sets us off. And that when we're able to do that, whether online or off, then social media will have the chance to be the inclusive and representative and important place for social connection that I still believe it can be.
Yes, Libby, shout it from the rooftops.
There was a question about if there's any data as part of a future of congressional efforts. So I put a link to the legislation currently sitting at the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. That's where you can find out what is Congress doing about this. There's a sister committee in the House that has a lot less legislation, but is holding similar hearings. So if you want to know what is Congress going to do about data and social media companies, those are the committees to watch.
All right, so I think we might be down to our last two questions. I'll take one of them. This is
okay.
This is a question that everyone can answer, but first, you, Libby, is what is your favorite brunch?
My favorite brunch?
Yeah,
like the event or the food or the
food. The food.
You heard me say I have a small child, right? I haven't had brunch in 10 years. I like what would be appropriate for me to answer? It's been so long since I had the essential tension in brunch is sweet or savory, and I'm having that problem right now. I'm gonna go savory. I'm gonna go chicken and waffles with gravy because it's morning.
I was just thinking chicken and waffles because you right, you get sweet and savory at the same time, and dessert.
You do.
And breakfast.
Yep. Without having to eat sausage. I'm not that into sausage, but I'll take a chicken and waffle for sure. But it has to have gravy because gravy is like a food group.
Someone says, is there an inappropriate brunch?
I don't know that there is. That's one of the great things about brunch, right? It's like, just feed your body when it's ready to be fed. Yeah. I'm
hearing hash browns and hot sauce. Depends on how many mimosas are involved. Scrapple. Now, okay, I'm gonna need to know
what is scrapple.
A Monte Cristo.
Oh, Monte Cristo. There's actually a restaurant in Ann Arbor that has a really legit Monte Cristo. Yeah, it's a good one.
Someone tell me about Scrapple, please.
Oh, it's Philly food. I like it.
What is like a day old cheesesteak?
I like us guessing what Scrapple is.
Somewhat.
All right, so narrating for the folks who are listening, Scrapple is also known by the Pennsylvania Dutch name panhas. It is pork scraps and trimmings combined with cornmeal and wheat flour, buckwheat flour, and spices.
Is it like a hash then, or is it like a patty?
This person says it's weird ground mystery meat fried, which sounds amazing.
Right, doesn't it?
And for everybody who's listening, a big part of this is, so when we create a data brunch, like part of why we do this is because there are so many incredible people doing incredible things with data. And we just wish that we had time to like sit down with you on Sunday morning and have a mimosa. I don't know if that's allowed to say, but that's what we were saying. Like, how do we have these conversations where it's just a conversation between folks talking about things, things that we care about and things that are important. So thank you for joining Data Brunch. Thank you for being part of this and for sharing your expertise. If people were interested in learning more about your work or contacting you, where would it be a good place for them to go to find out more?
Sure. So Libby H, LIBBYH on Twitter and .com and at UMich.
Thank you, Libby.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. And thanks everybody for coming to the biennial meeting. You're the highlight of our year.
That's right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for the awesome questions. This was a multi-sensory experience, I have to say.
It was.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that is the end of our episode. Thank you so much to everyone for being with us live, and also for everybody who is listening to us.
Oh, sorry, Anna. This is one of those things where, yeah, go ahead.
This is a live moment in a live episode. So if you aren't already, please do subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell us what you'd like to hear. We love to hear from you. We have a feedback form on our website. Anyone who's live, message us in now. And do share your thoughts on social media using hashtag Data Brunch. We love to get to see stuff pop up there. And as always, thank you to the over 700 members of ICPSR. This podcast and the biennial meeting would not be possible without our ICPSR members. A shout out to some of the representatives who are here live. ICPSR representatives make the world go round, and we appreciate you so much. And you can get in touch with us by visiting our website, which is icpsr.umich.edu. You can email us at icpsr-podcast at umich.edu. And I want to give a special thank you to Scott, our producer, who makes us sound less bloopery than we really are in real life.
Thank you so much, Scott. For everyone here live, and for those listening at home or in your car or however you podcast, we'll be giving away some ICPSR swag to someone out there. Take a picture and tag us on social media using hashtag DataBrunch, or send us an email at icpsr-podcast@umich.edu. And we can't wait to see it.
I'm Anna.
And I'm Dory. And thanks for joining us at ICPSR's Data Brunch.
Woohoo!
Yay! And so thank you for reading the part I was supposed to read. We have our intro and outro, and I was like so into the interview that I was, oh yeah, there's more things we have to say at the end. So thank
Poor
you.
Scott's gonna have to edit me trying to figure out which ones I'm saying and which ones I'm not. And thank you to everybody who's here live and you got to see our real life process of a podcast taping. It's a treat to have all of you here. And please do join us. We're going to get started in about half an hour with a closing session. That's our final moment of the biennial meeting. I can't believe it. So we will be meeting in Kumo space in half an hour, just to share kind of final thoughts and last things that we've learned. And that is a session where we can all chat together. It's not just us talking at you. It's time for us all to connect. So we hope to see you there. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you in Kumo space in just a bit. Thank you, Libby. Oh, you're amazing.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Take care.